Ever get that feeling? Like the economy, society, maybe even, your own apartment building? It's being run by some kind of anonymous financial shadow government.
Well, if you do, you're probably picking up on the influence of private equity.
PE. That's our focus today.
That's absolutely right. For this deep dive, we're really peeling back the layers on, well, one of the most powerful but maybe least understood financial forces out there, private equity, or PE, firms.
And our mission?
Our mission is to break down how they work. They're highly effective, sometimes pretty shocking methods for massive wealth extraction. Our sources actually call it a calculated strategy of plunder.
Right. And you really need to know how these huge players operate because, frankly, they're everywhere. We're talking firms like Blackstone, Carlyle, KKR, Apollo.
Big names in finance, maybe not household names, though.
Exactly. But they touch almost everything, from, say, the quality of care in your grandmother's nursing home to maybe the cost of an ambulance ride or even your monthly rent check.
So let's start with the basic business model. Because while the firms themselves can be pretty secretive, the core idea is actually quite straightforward. It boils down to massive leverage.
Leverage, meaning debt. Right. Lots of it.
Precisely. Loads of debt. The formula they use to buy up companies privately is, well, it's very effective. They put in just a sliver of their own money.
Just a bit.
Yeah, then they bring in investment capital from others, often public pension funds, interestingly enough. And then the big part, they stack a huge amount of borrowed money, debt, on top of all that.
Okay.
They use that whole pot to buy the company. Then the plan is usually to restructure it, slash costs pretty aggressively, and hopefully sell it off a few years later for a really big profit.
And their reach is just astonishing. Like you said, you might not know the founders of KKR personally.
Probably not.
But maybe you rent your home from Invitation Homes. That's run by Blackstone. Or if you've been to the ER, your doctor's billing could easily be managed by a company owned by KKR. They're sort of embedded in essential services.
They really are. And, this brings us right to the tools they use, some pretty astonishing financial tools to generate these massive returns, often using the companies they just bought as collateral.
Okay, let's unpack that, this financial engineering. Let's start with the one that honestly sounds the most fundamentally unfair. This debt engine and something called dividend recapitalizations.
Right, the dividend recap. This is where the risk gets transferred almost immediately. So the PE firm buys the company.
Okay.
And then almost instantly, sometimes, they force that company they just bought to take out a massive loan.
The company takes out the loan?
Yes, using its own assets as collateral. And that borrowed money, it gets paid directly back to the PE firm as a dividend.
Wait, hold on. So they buy a company, force it to borrow money, and that money pays the PE firm back its initial investment. That sounds like buying a house and immediately forcing the house to take out a mortgage just to pay you back your down payment.
That's actually a perfect analogy. It's called debt loading. The PE firm basically takes its own financial risk off the table, sometimes within months.
Wow.
They privatize the profit right away, while the company they bought is now stuck with this crippling long-term debt.
And this isn't some small-time tactic. I mean, Clayton, Dubilier, and Rice, when they bought Hertz.
Yeah, the rental car company.
They quickly forced Hertz to borrow an extra $1 billion. $1 billion, just to pay the firm a dividend.
Exactly. And the consequences for the companies, they could be catastrophic. Think about Payless Shoe Source or the lab testing firm Trident USA. Both filed for bankruptcy not long after being forced into these kinds of recapitalizations.
So the company collapses.
The PE firm often keeps the cash it already extracted. And, well, the employees lose their jobs. It's extraction, often at the cost of the company's stability.
Yeah, that makes the goal pretty clear. It's not about long-term health. It's about quick, high-yield cash extraction. Okay, what's another key tool in their kit for stripping value?
Asset stripping, often through something called sale-leasebacks. This is really common in retail.
Sale-leasebacks. How does that work?
Okay, so a PE firm buys a company, then almost immediately it sells off the company's most valuable physical assets, like the stores themselves or the headquarters building, real estate.
Right, the actual property.
Exactly. But then they force the company they just bought to lease those same properties back.
So now the company has to pay rent on buildings it used to own.
Precisely, which creates a long-term, usually very expensive rent obligation. Our sources talk about the retailer Shopko. Sun Capital, the PE firm, sold off Shopko stores for about $815 million.
A big chunk of cash for Sun Capital.
Huge. But at Lock Shop go into these really expensive 15 to 20-year leases for those exact same properties. They basically traded a valuable asset for a massive long-term liability.
Wow. Okay. And, sometimes the most profitable move isn't even selling a stable business, right? It's actually engineering its collapse, bankruptcy as a strategy.
Yeah, it sounds completely counterintuitive, I know, but bankruptcy can actually be a tool for them to shed massive liabilities, specifically pensions.
Pensions. Okay.
We see cases of what some have called pension laundering. So firms like Sun Capital, again, pushed retail chains like Marsh Supermarket or Friendly's restaurants into bankruptcy.
And the goal there?
Well, it allowed them to offload millions, sometimes hundreds of millions, in unfunded pension obligations onto the government agency, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, the PBGC.
So wait, the PE firm gets rid of the responsibility for retiree pensions?
Yep.
A taxpayer-backed government agency steps in to cover them?
Right.
And the PE firm often gets to keep the more profitable bits of the business running, even after bankruptcy.
That's often how it plays out. The taxpayer effectively ends up subsidizing the PE firm's exit strategy. It's the ultimate socialization of risk, privatization of profit.
It really is. Okay, now that we kind of get the mechanics, the financial tools they use to drain cash, let's shift to the human cost. Because this profit strategy really hits home when you look at essential services, starting with maybe the most vulnerable area, healthcare.
Yeah, the statistics here they're pretty devastating. Multiple studies have linked PE ownership of nursing homes to a clear decline in the quality of care.
How so?
Higher hospital readmission rates, for one, and one major study estimated around 20,000 premature deaths linked directly to these kinds of cost-cutting measures in PE-owned facilities.
20,000 premature deaths. That's a staggering number. It really suggests that the pursuit of efficiency, just that pure financial metric of cutting staff costs, is literally trading lives for profit.
It's arguably the ultimate cost of this extraction model. And, the cost cutting isn't just in nursing homes. It extends to really high-level specialized care, like emergency rooms.
ERs, how does PE get involved there?
Well, firms like Envision and Team Health, they do what are called roll-ups. They buy up physician staffing groups across entire regions to control emergency room staffing.
Consolidating control.
Exactly. And our source mentions a specific case, Dr. Brovant, an ER physician. He was actually fired after he complained that severe understaffing was violating critical safety protocols, specifically the Code Blue policy for cardiac arrest.
So he spoke up about safety.
And he paid the price. They prioritized the bottom line over patient safety, according to his account.
And their profit strategy in healthcare also includes something we probably all hate, surprise medical billing.
Oh, absolutely. These PE-owned staffing groups are notorious for it. They'll bill patients at high out-of-network rates, even if the patient specifically went to an in-network hospital.
Because the doctor they saw was technically employed by this out-of-network PE-owned group.
Precisely. And they fight tooth and nail to protect this revenue stream. There was this group, reportedly funded by these firms, called Doctor-Patient Unity. They apparently spent something like $54 million lobbying to weaken federal legislation that was designed specifically to stop surprise billing.
$54 million. Wow. Okay, moving from healthcare to, well, where many of us live, housing. If you want to see PE influence really in action, maybe just look out your window. After the 2008 financial crisis, they weren't just buying failing companies. They bought up entire neighborhoods.
That's absolutely right. Firms like Blackstone, through their company Invitation Homes, they just swept in and bought up hundreds of thousands of foreclosed single-family homes.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, they converted former homeowners into renters on a massive scale. And in doing so, they basically created a whole new asset class, the corporate landlord. They became the largest single-family home rental landlords in the country almost overnight.
And reading about their management tactics, sometimes they sound ruthless, designed purely to maximize profit, whatever the cost to tenants.
Yeah, tenants have reported really aggressive, sometimes dehumanizing debt collection tactics. There was one case mentioned where Invitation Homes actually wrapped caution tape around a tenant's house just to shame them into paying rent.
Caution tape, like a crime scene?
Like a crime scene. And then there's this heartbreaking case of a family who had to flee their rental because of toxic mold exposure.
Which is the landlord's responsibility.
Right. But they were then sued for eviction by the PE-owned company simply for non-payment of rent while they were trying to deal with the mold crisis. It shows how they could weaponize the legal system against individuals, often people suffering from neglect.
It's grim. And beyond homes, PE is also quietly taking control of basic public infrastructure, right?
Yeah, when local governments are strapped for cash, PE firms often step in offering a solution. KKR, for example, leased the water utilities in Middletown, Pennsylvania and Bayonne, New Jersey.
Lease the water system.
Yeah. KKR then apparently tripled its money very quickly and sold its stake. But the cities, they were left locked into these long-term, really lopsided contracts that guaranteed significant rate increases for residents for years to come.
So the city got some cash up front.
A temporary fix. But the residents ended up absorbing the long-term costs through higher water bills.
Okay, finally, in this section on societal costs, let's touch on a truly captive audience. The prison industry.
Right. Firms like Platinum Equity, which owns the company Securus, they invest heavily in prison phone companies.
The companies that inmates have to use to call family?
Exactly. And since inmates have absolutely zero choice in providers, these companies can charge extraordinarily high fees for just basic communication. It's been called, pretty aptly, I think, a tax on pain for families who are just desperately trying to stay connected with loved ones who are incarcerated.
It seems like an industry just perfectly designed for exploitation. But there is a glimmer of hope here. Targeted activism actually worked.
Absolutely. There's a campaign called Worth Rises. They specifically targeted the investors in Platinum Equity, particularly the public pension funds that put money into PE.
Going after the source of the capital.
Exactly. And it led the Pennsylvania State Pension Fund to actually refuse a $150 million investment in Platinum Equity, specifically citing the negative press and the ethical concerns around the prison phone business. It really shows that pressuring the money source can sometimes work.
That's fascinating. Okay, so that brings us to the system itself. How do these incredibly powerful firms consistently seem to avoid legal financial accountability, even when the companies they own fail and cause, well, massive social harm?
Well, they rely on really sophisticated legal insulation. There's the Manor Care case, for example. A family sued the nursing home chain and its parent company, Carlyle, over neglect.
Carlyle, the big PE firm.
Right. But Carlyle successfully argued in court that it didn't actually own the facility. It claimed it only advised the separate funds that technically owned Manor Care.
Like a legal disappearing act.
Pretty much. And it allowed them to get the case against Carlyle itself dismissed. They intentionally create these complex webs of ownership specifically to shield the parent PE firm from liability.
Wow. And then, of course, there's the very well-known tax advantage their executives get, the carried interest loophole.
Ah, yes, carried interest. This is probably the most politically charged loophole of them all. It allows the PE executive share of the profits, typically 20%, the carry.
Which they get for managing the businesses, right, for doing the restructuring work.
Exactly. It's compensation for their management services. But this loophole allows that income to be taxed at the much lower capital gains rate instead of the ordinary income rate like salaries or bonuses.
So they're performing labor, managing businesses, but they get taxed as if they were just passively investing their own capital. It's a huge windfall, mainly for the extremely wealthy executives at the top.
And that tax advantage, you can bet, is fiercely defended by powerful friends in high places. The strategy of hiring former top government officials, the classic revolving door, is critical here.
Bringing former politicians and regulators onto their payrolls.
Yeah, people like former Secretary of State James Baker, or maybe more recently, former SEC Chairman Jay Clayton. They're hired specifically to leverage their connections and shape policy and regulation in ways favorable to the PE industry.
Okay, so if the system often seems captured, or at least heavily influenced, what levers are actually left to influence change? What can, you listening right now potentially do about this kind of systemic issue?
Well, our sources point to some pretty powerful alternative paths, ways to bypass what might seem like a gridlocked Congress, federal agencies, for instance.
Like the SEC or Health and Human Services.
Exactly. They can impose concrete rules, like minimum staffing requirements in nursing homes. That directly tackles the cost-cutting issue. Or they could potentially restrict PE access to 401k retirement funds, which would cut off a significant source of capital.
And what about closer to home, state and local governments?
They actually have considerable power, often overlooked. They can actively investigate anti-competitive roll-ups, like when a PE firm tries to buy up every local doctor's practice or every vet clinic in town.
Right, antitrust at the local level.
Yes. And states also have the power to explicitly prohibit some of these really extractive tactics we talked about, like forcing dividend recaps or enacting stronger rules against predatory debt collection practices, especially against tenants.
And we circle back to that activism piece.
We do. The success, even if limited, of targeting those public pension funds, the investors, shows that disrupting the flow of capital, or at least making ethical behavior a factor in investment decisions, can influence PE behavior, especially in industries that are, let's say, morally questionable.
So the fundamental tension we've really explored today seems clear. Private equity is, well, hugely successful, partly because it finds and exploits loopholes. Loopholes that prioritize rapid extraction and short-term profit, often over the long-term stability and, frankly, the public welfare of the companies and communities they interact with.
Yeah, and the source material really frames this as a fundamental choice for America right now. Are we sort of heading for what they call lost decades, characterized by stagnation, political disengagement, where these systemic flaws just continue unchecked?
Oh.
Or can we look back to historical periods of reform, like the Progressive era, around the turn of the 20th century, where monopolies were actually challenged and splintered, and fundamental systems were reshaped in the public interest?
History definitely shows reform is possible, but it seems to require transparency first and then action. The source material actually notes something interesting here, that even just one enterprising member of Congress, or maybe a single committee, could potentially launch a high-level investigation into PE's global influence.
Using subpoena power. They wouldn't even need to pass a new bill to start asking tough questions.
And specifically, they mention investigating the sometimes disturbing ties between major PE firms like Blackstone and powerful foreign governments like, say, Saudi Arabia and its sovereign wealth fund.
Right, the national security implications, the influence on foreign policy.
So maybe we leave you, the listener, with this question for your own deep dive. If transparency really is the critical first step towards accountability, what specific area of private equity's complex, often opaque global influence, especially thinking about those ties to sovereign wealth funds and foreign governments, is most ripe, most urgent for public scrutiny today?